Hi, I'm Aliyah. I'm just here to share my story with you. I'm just going to start off with a verse from Psalm 30, verse 11 to 12. You have turned my mourning into joyful dancing. You have taken away my clothes of mourning and clothed me with joy, that I might sing praises to you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give you thanks forever. So I grew up in England, in Liverpool. So I grew up in a family, my mum, my dad and my sister. I didn't go to church, didn't really know anything about God. Primary schools over there are maybe a bit different. We didn't learn religious education or anything like that. So I didn't really know anything of God, who he was. I didn't know anyone that went to church. So that was maybe a bit different living over there than over here. So then I went to secondary school, and quite a memorable moment for me would be we got sent home. It was like a school trip, and we got sent home a form to kind of fill in, from our parents to say that you could go. And one of the questions on it was religion. And my mum wrote C of E, which stands for Church of England. And I remember she gave me the form back to take back into school, and I remember looking at the form and I was thinking, C of E? I was like, why has she written that? I've never been to Church of England in my life. So I crossed it out and I wrote no religion, because I'd maybe a bad side of my personality would be I always have to have an answer for everything. So if I didn't believe in God, it meant that I was an atheist, I had no religion. So I changed that on the form and handed it back in. So from about then, I was about 13, 14, I started hanging out with my friends a lot at the weekends, stuff like that. Maybe got into drinking, maybe things maybe happen a lot earlier in England than they do over here. So you're a bit younger and you might be drinking, things like that. And I was definitely out every weekend. And I wasn't a bad child, I was still good. My parents didn't think there was any issues. I went to school, I did well. I moved school for my A-level year, did my A-levels, and I started looking for uni. And Belfast was going to be my backup because it had lower grades than where I wanted to go in England. So I came over with my mum for a few days, and we looked around, and I absolutely loved it. So when I went back, I changed it and I put Belfast as my first choice of where I wanted to come for uni. So 5 years ago now, I came over here and I started studying chemical engineering at Queen's. I moved into Elms on the Saturday, and there was a few people in that day, maybe about 6 out of the 11, and I made friends with 2 girls called Rachel and Ashton. And that night, we went up to other people's places in Elms and just made friends. And then the Sunday morning I got up and I remember walking around Elms and I was like, where are Rachel and Ashton? And they weren't there. And then about an hour later they got back. And I was kind of awkwardly oh, they've been somewhere and they've not invited me. And I was like, oh, where have you been? And they were like, oh, we've been at church. And it was relief swept over me. And I was like, oh, I'm so glad they never invited me to that. And that evening, a boy called Jordan also moved in, and we became a 4, but the 3 of them happened to be Christians, and it was me, and I was very, very far-fetched. Probably even from people they'd maybe been friends with before, I was kind of out there. Do you know what I mean? And we kind of made this really close-knit group, and they kind of never judged me for what I did and how I lived my life. They kind of tried to look after me, kind of keep me safe, maybe at the weekends or nights out, stuff like that. And I kind of occasionally asked them about their faith, but I didn't actually care what their answer was, and I didn't actually care. I maybe thought it was a bit weird, but these people were quite normal, which I would have thought would have been a stark contrast, because I thought, if you're a Christian, you're usually quite weird, but these people seemed quite normal. So in second year, we moved into a house, the 4 of us, and then also another boy joined us called Aaron. And early on into the year, in about late October, early November, his granny died. And he wrote into the group chat about the funeral. And I was kind of to Rachel, I was I really want to go to this funeral. And she was kind of a bit oh, okay. And then she was it's in North Belfast. And I was we'll get the bus. So we got 2 buses over from South Belfast by Queen's to North Belfast to this funeral. And we were kind of sat there, and the pastor was kind of talking about how his granny was now cancer-free. She was in heaven. She was free from all this pain that she was in. And I was kind of listening, taking this all in. And then me and Rachel got on the bus on the way home, and I kind of started talking to her about it. And I was quoting stuff back that the pastor had said. And Rachel was a bit taken aback. She was Aliyah, you listened better than I did. And then that day, I was kind of mulling things over in my head. And that evening, I kind of sat Rachel down, and I was like, Rachel, I think I want to come to church with you. And she burst into tears, and I was like, oh my days, what have I done? And she was so overjoyed and she was so happy. So about a week later, we kind of went to church, and it was all a bit alien to me. I didn't really get it. I liked the worship, world music as I would have seen it, But everything else, I was a bit like, kind of what's going on here? And then I was kind of chatting to Rachel about it. We went for a few weeks, and then I was kind of like to Rachel, I was like, look, like I'll continue to go. I was like, but I'm not really getting this. And she was like, have you been praying about it? And I was like, oh, no, like definitely not. And she was like, you need to pray about it. So I waited till I went to bed that night because I thought that's how you prayed. So I got to bed, closed my eyes, thought that's how you had to pray too. And I was kind of like, dear God, like, you know, like, can you just help me? Amen. Like that was it. I felt so stupid. And that was kind of it. That was kind of my first experience at kind of praying, whether I did it rightly or wrongly, but I suppose it doesn't really matter. And then we kind of carried on from there. Rachel would kind of like talk to me about things. We used to hold like secret Bible studies like in my room because I hadn't told anyone, because because of those four, I'd kind of fallen into quite like a big group of Christians, but I was just this kind of odd one out. I didn't really feel like an odd one out. I did sometimes, but I was kind of the odd one out, and I was like, I don't know what's going to come with the pressure of them all knowing that I've started to go to church. So I was like, I didn't want that pressure. So we kind of like, if anyone was moving around the house, we'd stuff the Bibles under the beds and just pretend we were just like chatting, you know, having a nice chat in the bed. So she kind of went stuff with me. She'd like been a Christian, like she'd been brought up in church her whole life, but she was actually also from England, which is maybe was a bit alien to me. So we kind of went through Bible studies, and stuff kind of started to like sink in. We kept going to church. And then one day I was reading the Bible, and I was like, oh, like maybe I can believe this. Like maybe I do think this is true. But then I was a bit worried that because I'd become familiar maybe with reading the Bible and familiar with the passages, that's why I thought was true. So anyway, I carried on, and it wasn't like a set moment where I kind of like gave my life to Jesus. It just kind of happened over a period of about 6 months. So it was probably about February 2017 that I actually like gave my life to Jesus and became a Christian. It took a lot for me to tell the people, like even the Christians around me, because I don't know, I just felt this pressure, because I was like, yeah, I've become a Christian, but what says 2 months down the line I think, actually it's not for me, I want to go back to how I was. And luckily and obviously like that didn't happen. And kind of like my life just kind of like flipped and changed. Like I got this like joy, like they talk about in the Bible about like this unexplainable joy, and how I read that verse before, and I kind of got this joy and like this childlike faith, and I kind of like had all this stuff in my heart but nothing in my head, which is maybe the opposite of a lot of people that have maybe grew up in church. They might have a lot of head knowledge, they might know a lot of stuff about the Bible, they might know a lot of stuff from Sunday school, but it's maybe not in their heart. Whereas I've kind of had to go the other way, which also comes with struggles, because I suddenly was a Christian, but I was like, if I tell people about my faith and they ask me a question, I might not know the answer to it. Or if they're like, oh, point that bit to me in the Bible, I'll be like, I don't know where that is. So it kind of came with that kind of pressure too. And then kind of a few months down the line, so I actually started going out with a boy called Stuart, and he was a lead in worship at a church called Billeau. And I was kind of saying to him, like, look, like I don't really know like what I'm thinking, I don't really know that much. And he was like, Billeau are running an alpha course, why don't you try that? So me and him went together, and I honestly thought it was amazing. Like I learned so much. It was great to be able to chat with people, like old people, young people, all at different stages of their life, and kind of ask them stuff. But then there was a night on prayer, and it kind of hit me that like maybe I didn't pray enough, like maybe I didn't have this personal relationship with God that they always talk about. So I kind of went home from there. I cried a lot, like I was very upset. I was like, look, I say I'm a Christian. I was like, but I don't really know what I'm doing. So that night I kind of like really prayed to God, asked him to like speak to me, asked him to like speak to me through words, through the Bible, through pictures. And I felt like I really got in a closer relationship with God from then. Like he started to open things up to me. He maybe revealed some things to me that were like from the Bible, but before I'd actually read it in the Bible. So I thought that was really, really great. And so kind of from then, I've just kind of been like building on my faith. Like it's been getting stronger. Even about a year, this time last year, like I felt like I really started to hear from God even more, maybe from like words that are maybe meant for people and stuff like that. And I felt like, I kind of said to someone, I was like, oh, I feel like I've just kind of become a Christian all over again. And they were like, oh, Aliyah, it's not becoming a Christian all over again. It's just like deepening your faith. They were like, this should in theory happen every year. Like every single year, you should be able to build on what you know from the last year. So I've just been doing stuff. I help run a student ministry in Belfast called Home Fellowship. And that's just for students to come. I think it's really important because, as I said about this joy, like I really sometimes see Christians that have maybe been Christians their whole lives, and they've just lost that joy, they've lost that childlike faith. And I'd really, really love for everyone to just get that back and be able to experience it like I did like 3.5 years ago. So that's kind of my heart for the people. And I kind of felt like before I became a Christian, I maybe put a lot of my worth on whether I was going to do well in my exams, what I was going to study at university, whether I'd get into university, what job I'd get, how much I'd get paid. And I feel like since becoming a Christian, like that's kind of flipped. Like my identity is in Jesus. Like although, yeah, these things do matter, but at the end of the day, God has a plan for my life. So whether things go right or things go wrong, like God is out there and he is looking after me. So I just don't really feel like I need to put my worth or my identity in that anymore, because I can just put it all in Jesus, and I'm just so thankful that he has brought me to him.